All right, so we are continuing with our big idea, understanding the location and movement of shapes helps us to describe the world around us. We're continuing with the concept of transformations, being able to describe and apply transformations, and now we're moving on to reflections. So we looked already at the translations video. Now we're moving on to the reflections video, so making sure that we've looked at all of them by the end before we move on to concept practice. All right, so a reflection. Here we have quadrilateral JKLM, called a quadrilateral because it's four-sided, and it is reflected vertically, so up and down. It's reflected up and down through the horizontal axis at 5. So at 5 is where we would find our reflection line. Our reflection line on the grid is at the 5 line. So that's how we would describe it. It is flipped horizontally to the right across our reflect line at the horizontal axis of 5. And you can see every vertex has moved. A couple things to really notice when you're doing reflections is that the shape needs to be lined up in exactly the same position. You need to be able to see all of our points across from each other in the appropriate spot. So we can see those are across from each other. These are directly across from each other. These points are directly across from each other. These points are directly across from each other. So we know that we've reflected it properly then. That changes a little bit when it's on a diagonal, but not a whole lot. Now, the other thing that you want to notice is how far it is from the reflect line. So we can see L is 1 square from the reflect line. M is 2 complete squares from the reflect line, so it should be 2 complete squares from the reflect line. J is 1, 2, 3, 4 complete squares. This side should also be 4. K is 3, so this side should also be 3. And then you can be better assured that your reflection is in the correct position. Each vertex moved horizontally, so the distance between the vertex and the line of reflection is equal between the image and the original, as we just discussed. After a reflection, the shape and its image face opposite ways. So you can see that they're facing opposite directions. K is on this side, K is on that side. The images are still congruent, so they are still the same size, they still have the same angles, they still have the same lengths of all of their lines. We can show this by tracing the image and then flipping and tracing it and seeing that they match exactly. All right, now you're going to go ahead and you're going to reflect octagon B over the diagonal line, so just the reflection. Here's our shape, noticing where our reflect line is. Be careful, notice it is a diagonal reflect line, and it is half a square away from this vertex, so that will give you a location for your reflect line. Do use a ruler, please, when drawing your reflect line. Go ahead and press pause and try that now. All right, now we're going to watch the video of the reflection. All right, now we're going to move on to our reflection. We are going to reflect octagon B over the diagonal line. So first we have to draw in octagon B. And I can see my first corner is 1 over and 5 up, and 1 over and 6 up. And from there, actually, I can draw my shape quite well because I can see that it's 3 on the side here, with 2 across the middle here. So this is B. Now for my reflect line, I notice that my reflect line is cutting this particular square in half. It's right off the corner of this one, and it's cutting it in half. And I notice that it's going through all of these squares at a diagonal. So I'm going to use my ruler to draw in my reflect line, making sure that I'm cutting each of these boxes in half diagonally. Now I'm going to use tissue paper to do this reflection. Sometimes we can visualize it. We can use a Mira, but tissue paper works quite nicely, and a Mira isn't always available, and visualizing doesn't always work very well. So when you place your tissue paper on, you're actually going to trace your shape. Trace it as well as you can with nice straight lines if possible. And you also need to trace your reflect line. Best if you go from beginning to end on your reflect line, so you have that as a point of reference. Now I'm going to do exactly what I said. I'm going to flip or reflect my shape. I'm going to line it up on my reflect line, and now I have this distance of this reflect line to help me determine that I've placed it correctly. As well, I can see that from this corner it should be half a square away, so from this corner it should be half a square away. And now I just lift my tissue paper and I put my shape onto the paper where I saw it. That corner was right there. I'm going to place my tissue paper back down just to confirm. Yep, that corner was perfect. Now I know my shape is 3 long, 1 up, 1 over, and then there's that square on top and the square on the side. So this is my reflected image. To confirm that I've placed all of my spots correctly, I could see that yes, this is a half a square away from the reflect line. This corner should be 2 complete squares diagonally across from the flip line, and it is the same over here, so my shapes are in the correct position. The other thing to note, of course, too, is that you want to make sure that if it's on lines in the original image, your reflected image should also be following on lines. So just to confirm that you've truly placed your tissue paper on the correct position, it should line up with the lines appropriately. And this is what your reflected shape should look like. As you can see, it's lined up on the lines. It is the correct distance from each corner to the reflect line. All right, and now we're going to practice. We're going to choose the image that is a reflection. Now remember, a reflection is always pointing the opposite direction, and we're going to describe that one. Go ahead and press pause and do that now. All right, so looking at my shapes, I can see that it needs to be pointing in the opposite direction, which makes this set my reflection. I know my original image does not have any lines by it, so the top image is my original image. I need to check what direction it's reflecting and what line it's reflecting through. So in this case, it is reflecting down, if this is my original image, and this is my secondary image. Oops, it's reflecting down. Now I need to find out where my reflect line is. Well, my reflect line has to be half of this distance because my reflect line is equal and the amount of space from one side to the other is going to have to be equal. So I need to divide this in half equally. Doing that is quite easy in this case because it is 2 complete squares, so it's going to be at the 1 square point. So let me just draw my reflect line in there. Oops. That would be my reflect line. So I could say that this shape has been reflected down through the vertical axes of 10 because this is the vertical axis. It's up and down, and it is at number 10. That's how you would describe that reflection. All right, moving on now to watch the last video, the rotation video, before you can move on to your concept practice.